Hey guys, tonight we slip through an open colonnade and into a world both scented and silent. The air is heavy with sweetness, floral, musky, with something oddly metallic underneath, and the marble tiles beneath your bare feet are cool, whispering as you move. You've entered Cleopatra's bath chamber. And this, you realize, is not just a place to get clean. It's a performance. A potion. A slow-burning spell. You probably won't survive this, but don't worry, at least you'll smell divine while failing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're somewhere cozy right now, post your location and local time down in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin at the threshold, where two attendants stand like statues beside silver braziers. Their linen garments rustle slightly as they incline their heads, allowing you passage into the chamber. Inside, the room opens like a flower, petal-domed ceiling, soft gold inlays catching torchlight, and in the center, a sunken bath, wide enough for 3 people, filled nearly to the brim with pale, glimmering water. Cleopatra hasn't arrived yet. That's your cue to help with preparation. Not that you're a servant, exactly, you're somewhere in between. An observer with the luxury of curiosity. You kneel beside the bath as a young girl, no more than 12, gently sprinkles dried hibiscus petals onto the surface. They float, drifting like forgotten thoughts. To your left, another woman pours warm water from a bronze ewer over the side, letting it cascade in steady rhythm. The sound blends with the murmurs of priests somewhere deeper in the palace. The bath must be perfect. Not just warm. Not just clean. But balanced. Symbolic. Everything matters. You glance upward, and there, through a narrow skylight, streams a shaft of moonlight. Cleopatra insists on bathing under the moon, especially when it's waxing. For reasons of strength, of fertility, or maybe just because the glow flatters her cheekbones. Historians still argue whether this was grounded in ritual or pure aesthetics, but here in the moment, it feels like truth. Someone brushes past you carrying a reed basket of crushed blue lotus. The scent hits immediately, sweet, narcotic, faintly aquatic. You know this flower. Grown along the Nile's edges, it's rumored to induce euphoria. Egyptians once pressed it into wine, believing it could bridge the world of dreams and gods. Tonight, it perfumes Cleopatra's bathwater. And that's just the start. Next comes papyrus pollen, sprinkled like dust across the steaming surface. You watch it melt into the heat, disappearing almost at once. The temple healers say it strengthens memory. Or maybe they just had too much of it lying around. It's hard to say. You step aside as a tall man enters, robed in linen striped with indigo. His arms are heavy with jars, pottery, alabaster, and something that looks suspiciously like ivory. He sets them down beside the bath with reverence, muttering in Greek. These are the ingredients, though none of them are labeled. You lift one lid cautiously. It smells like honey and mint. Another? Like roasted almonds and rain-soaked earth. Everything here smells like something else. Like a memory you can't quite grasp. A small woman with a shaven head begins stirring the water slowly with a paddle carved from ebony. Around and around, until the petals, pollen, and oils dissolve into a single moving shimmer. The surface looks alive. Like it might speak, if you were brave enough to listen. There's laughter, suddenly, echoing from the far side of the chamber. Someone has slipped. A young eunuch is trying to sweep up a cluster of broken fig leaves with a palm fan, cheeks burning. No one scolds him. Even Cleopatra's attendants are too mellowed by the scent to be angry. And then, without ceremony, she enters. Not with trumpets. Not with a train of 20 veiled dancers. Just Cleopatra, in a white linen shift and braided hair heavy with beads. Her eyes, lined dark with kohl, flick across the chamber once, assessing. Approving. You feel your posture straighten without meaning to. She says nothing as she disrobes, handing her rings to one servant, her bracelets to another. A third catches her earrings before they fall. And then, as if stepping into a second skin, she lowers herself into the water. A sigh escapes her lips. Almost a purr. You notice something unexpected. A small cut on her wrist, tiny, like from a papyrus scroll. An attendant kneels beside her and applies a yellowish balm, murmuring something about crushed garlic and date sap. Cleopatra nods once, eyes closed. The room holds its breath. This is not just bathing. This is command. A quick mainstream note while we're here: Egyptian nobility considered bathing a sacred practice. Temples often had designated bathhouses for priests to cleanse before ceremonies. Water wasn't just hygiene, it was purity, protection, and sometimes even an offering. Cleopatra simply took the concept and elevated it to a divine art form. But not everything here is ancient orthodoxy. You notice one attendant add something from a small vial, a thick drop of green oil. Basil, perhaps? Or some imported herb from Crete. Whatever it is, it smells oddly like fresh bread. That's your third surprise of the night. Because behind all the myth, the mystery, the perfumes and processions, Cleopatra's bathwater, like Cleopatra herself, is part performance, part survival, part puzzle. And you've only just begun to figure it out. You remain by the bath, just close enough to feel the gentle warmth rising from the water, just far enough to stay invisible. Cleopatra's head tilts back, her braids fanned across the curved stone like a sunburst. A servant lifts a shallow bowl and begins to pour water over the queen's shoulders in rhythmic loops, letting it trace her collarbones and slip down her arms like melted silver. The scent in the room has deepened, more floral now, tinged with citrus and something faintly medicinal. You glance toward the collection of jars again. One has been uncorked. A bright yellow paste has been scooped from it and is being carefully smeared along Cleopatra's temples. The mixture contains crushed frankincense and possibly myrrh, though the proportions are a guarded secret. It's a mask for her skin, yes, but also for her mind. Frankincense was thought to clear the senses and elevate the spirit. Priests burned it during rituals. Cleopatra wears it to prepare for conversation, seduction, or war. Sometimes all three. Historians still argue whether her famed charisma was natural or rehearsed, but standing here now, you begin to understand. She doesn't just bathe. She builds herself, scent by scent, ritual by ritual. A new vial is opened. You lean forward slightly and catch the smell, vinegar steeped with cinnamon bark and cloves. An imported recipe, likely from her Roman contacts. She uses it sparingly, as a sort of pickling brine for her skin, meant to tighten, tone, and awaken. It's applied with swan feather brushes, soft enough to tickle the skin but firm enough to smooth it. You can almost feel it, phantom-like, against your own face. A little pot of honey is next. Not for eating, though you suspect it would taste divine, but for layering over her elbows and knees. Mixed with milk curds, it makes a paste so rich you could preserve scrolls in it. And here's your mainstream fact: Cleopatra's famed milk and honey baths were more than myth. Though goat's milk was more common in Egypt, she was rumored to prefer ass's milk for its finer, creamier texture. Entire herds were maintained just to keep her supply fresh. You step back as two attendants unroll a long ribbon of soaked linen and begin wrapping it around her upper arms. It's soaked in barley water, cool, faintly nutty, and rumored to ease inflammation. You wonder how much of this is medical and how much is ceremonial, but then again, maybe there's no line between the two. A soft splash interrupts your thoughts. One of the younger girls has accidentally dropped a small vial into the bath. She retrieves it quickly, but not before a swirl of gold shimmers briefly across the surface. Gold. Real gold. Powdered into dust and used to make the queen's bath shimmer. Ridiculous. Extravagant. Irresistible. And yet, it fits. Cleopatra doesn't just cleanse herself. She alchemizes. Turns herself into myth. The water around her ripples as she lifts one foot slightly, letting the light catch her anklet, a tiny cobra, its mouth agape. You suspect it's enchanted. Or, at the very least, that she wants you to suspect. In the corner, an older woman begins preparing the post-bath oil, a mixture of olive oil, henna extract, and powdered mint. It's rubbed between her palms until warm, then sealed in a painted gourd to await the queen's emergence. You glance at the design, two falcons facing each other over a lotus bloom. Everything here is symbol, from the shape of the brush handles to the order in which the jars are opened. There's a sudden shift. Cleopatra speaks. A question. Casual. Quiet. But it ripples through the chamber like a drumbeat. Has the senator arrived? One of the servants bows. Not yet, great lady. She nods, unbothered, and closes her eyes again. You feel the air tighten slightly. This bath isn't just for relaxation, it's preparation. She's bathing to meet someone. Someone important. A Roman, perhaps. Or one of her own council. The thought that this entire sequence, this entire pageant of petals and oils, is a kind of strategic armor leaves you almost dizzy. And then someone brings out the box. It's lacquered, carved from ebony, inlaid with ivory lotus petals. Inside, delicate perfume cones. You've seen them before, though rarely this close. They're worn on top of the head and melt slowly in the heat, releasing scent as the evening unfolds. One is chosen, sandalwood and neroli, and placed on Cleopatra's crown braid. Already, it's softening, releasing a warm sweetness into the air. Another servant appears with a tiny copper bowl. It holds a paste the color of damp clay. She scoops a bit onto a cloth and begins rubbing it along the queen's heels. Cleopatra exhales, pleasure or pain, you're not sure. It's a mixture of mud from the Nile's sacred delta and ground carob pods. Supposedly it draws toxins out through the feet. Or maybe it just feels nice after a day in golden sandals. You catch your reflection in a polished bronze plate propped against the far wall. You look out of place. Awed. Just a little overwhelmed. But who wouldn't be? You're witnessing not just a queen's beauty routine, but her reconstruction. A strange, almost bittersweet moment passes. One of the younger attendants begins to hum softly. A lullaby, maybe? Or a hymn. Cleopatra's eyelids flutter but do not open. The bath chamber is suspended in this half moment, too quiet to last, too full to ignore. and still the bathwater shimmers. Still the petals float. Still the perfumes weave their spell. You step back, giving her space. She will rise soon. And when she does, the scent that clings to her will be the scent of power itself. She rises slowly, and every movement feels choreographed, not in a forced way, but like the world bends a little to accommodate her gestures. The water spills from her skin in glistening rivulets, pooling around her feet in perfect rings. Attendants move as one, lifting embroidered cloths to wrap her limbs, to shield her body from the evening chill, and perhaps also from lesser eyes. You stay respectfully still, though curiosity itches at your fingertips. It's hard not to marvel at the machinery behind her presence, an entire human infrastructure devoted to radiance. The bath is drained behind her. Its contents, infused with everything from honey to ground lotus, will not be wasted. Some of it will be offered at temples, some mixed into bombs for favored allies. Even the bathwater has purpose. That's Cleopatra for you. A soft voice murmurs the next instruction. The young ones. A trio of young women appear with glass flasks of oil, each tinted a different shade: amber, rose, emerald. One is warmed by a hand brazier, and the rich scent of fenugreek and basil begins to rise, subtle yet earthy. The oil is massaged into her arms with practiced grace, moving always upward, an ancient Egyptian technique believed to ward off aging and encourage divine energy to rise through the body. You watch as her skin catches the torchlight, slick but not greasy, burnished like sun-warmed stone. The fragrance is richer now, layered, nothing as simple as perfume, more like atmosphere. She doesn't just smell beautiful. She smells deliberate. And then comes the henna. Not for her hair, not yet, but for her fingertips. One woman gently wraps her hands in pale linen soaked in a dark paste made from crushed leaves, cedar ash, and a dash of fig wine. The dye will stain her nails a warm copper red, the mark of fertility and charm. It's also useful for disguise. Cleopatra is known to paint her fingers before negotiations, to draw the gaze toward her hands and away from her eyes. Historians still argue whether this tactic was conscious or instinctive, but either way, it worked. And now her hair. Her braids are unwrapped, slowly, carefully, with reverent fingers. A wooden comb carved with hawk motifs is drawn gently through her tresses. Her hair smells faintly of almonds and date oil. It's been treated with a rare extract, possibly desert mallow or sweet rush, depending on the season. Cleopatra's hair rituals are legendary, and you're about to witness one. A basin of warmed milk is placed at her feet, not for drinking, but to rinse her hair. The milk is steeped with crushed rosemary and a few petals of white rose. As it's poured through her strands, she leans her head forward, eyes closed. The milk traces paths down her back before being caught in a fine linen towel. Even here, nothing is wasted. The soaked cloth will be wrung out and stored, used later to scent her bed linens or the seams of her robes. A soft joke escapes from one of the girls, and Cleopatra laughs, quietly, but with genuine delight. You catch only a few words, something about a senator's beard catching fire near a torch. The story's full of gaps, but her smile makes up for them. Another pot arrives. This one contains crushed malachite, mixed with egg white and oil. A skin treatment? Yes. But also part of a ritual. Malachite was believed to protect against the evil eye and promote mental clarity. The green paste is applied in delicate stripes across her chest, then quickly wiped away, leaving only a faint shimmer. She will not leave this chamber until every aspect of her being is tuned like a lyre. one of her attendants brings out a delicate chain of tiny bells and places it at her ankles. The bells are so light you barely hear them. But the point is not sound, it's rhythm. Cleopatra paces deliberately, timing her steps with their soft chime, internalizing grace. It's said she could enter a room and silence it just by the pattern of her footfall. Now you understand why. And then comes the scent ritual. A bowl of charcoal is placed nearby. Over it, a few crumbles of kifi are dropped, a sacred incense made of raisins, honey, wine, and 13 other ingredients, including juniper and mastic. The smoke curls upward, sweet and rich and strange. She inhales deeply, letting the scent cleanse her lungs. Some say kifi cures headaches. Others say it opens the third eye. Cleopatra doesn't explain. She just breathes. You notice her lips are being brushed with a mixture that glints faintly, crushed pomegranate seeds, wax, and carmine. It darkens her lips without artificial shine. It looks like something kissed by flame. There's a pause as she examines herself in a hand mirror, carved from bronze, polished so finely you can see your own reflection peeking behind hers. Her gaze sharpens. This isn't vanity. It's calibration. And finally, the finishing touch. A servant brings forward a small woven pouch and opens it to reveal a powdery substance, crushed violet root mixed with a hint of iris. The powder is gently dusted across her shoulders and décolletage, leaving a soft, floral trace. In the right light, it makes her skin look like it's glowing. Magic? No. But it's close. You step back as she rises fully, the linen robes now layered over her shoulders, cinched at the waist with a braided sash of gold and turquoise beads. She is no longer bathing. She is no longer preparing. She is ready. Somewhere beyond these walls, a guest is waiting. A Roman, perhaps. Or a rival. Or a man who thinks himself powerful. He will meet Cleopatra tonight, and he will never forget it. Not because she's the most beautiful woman in the room, though she very well might be, but because she is prepared in ways that transcend beauty. From oils to rituals, from flower to stone, every part of her radiates intention. And still, she hasn't even spoken a full sentence. You step away as her sandals are fitted, papyrus soles lined with goat leather, embroidered with lotus petals. Every step she takes from here will echo. She leaves the bath chamber without haste, her figure swaying ever so slightly as she passes beneath a curtain of beadwork and smoke. You follow at a distance, your feet making barely a sound on the smooth alabaster tiles. The air cools as you walk, and the rich scents of rose, myrrh, and ground iris slowly give way to something else, something more grounded. Earthy. Crisp. The smell of papyrus scrolls and clay ink pots. This is the corridor that leads to her personal library. Yes, Cleopatra keeps her own scrolls. Not merely to impress guests or as decoration for Roman minds overly enamored with Greek aesthetics. No, these scrolls are read. Some are copied in her own hand. She is not just a queen of appearances, she is a queen of scholarship. A polyglot fluent in Egyptian, Greek, Aramaic, and even whispers of the language of the birds, if certain astrologers are to be believed. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra composed any of the medical tracts herself, but they all agree she studied them. Inside, the room is low-lit, with alabaster windows filtering in honeyed sunlight and oil lamps placed strategically along the carved stone benches. A servant quietly dusts a scroll case. Another rearranges tablets made of polished ivory. But most telling is the large copper basin placed at the room's center, its surface shimmering with scented water, floating rose petals, and thin curls of dried papyrus. This is her scent lab. A quieter chamber in her palace, used not just for display but for experimentation. Cleopatra is rumored to have worked with perfumers, physicians, and herbalists to craft her own blends, ointments not only meant to charm but to preserve health, mask infection, and calm the mind. You step closer, inhaling deeply. It's like breathing in a forgotten garden. An assistant, dressed in russet linen, is gently warming a mixture over a charcoal bowl. You peer into the clay pan and glimpse the early stages of an oil infusion, olive oil slowly embracing powdered cinnamon bark and crushed green cardamom. These aren't bath ingredients, per se, but rather part of the post-bath atmosphere. The way Cleopatra smells after she's gone is nearly as important as when she's present. And there, on a long stone shelf, lies a curious arrangement: open pouches of crushed herbs, painted jars with illegible glyphs, dried roots labeled only with small scraps of linen string. One is unmistakably fennel. Another, possibly spikenard. You pick up a small container and bring it cautiously near your nose. Ah! That would be asafoetida. Powerful. Not necessarily pleasant. But effective. A known treatment for stomach complaints, bad humors, and excessive phlegm. Cleopatra didn't use it for allure, but to maintain internal balance. After all, you can't rule an empire if your insides are rebelling. And in the ancient world, digestion was destiny. You move to another shelf, where a more luxurious spread awaits, boxes inlaid with ivory, still faintly fragrant. One contains preserved blue lotus petals, slightly sticky with resin. Another reveals fragments of dried pomegranate peel, which Cleopatra favored not only as a flavor but as a mild astringent, believed to preserve the elasticity of the skin. And tucked in one corner, half hidden behind a reed basket, is a small vial with dark sediment. Crocodile dung. Yes. That's not a joke. There are recorded instances of ancient Egyptian women using crocodile excrement mixed with fermented figs as a form of contraception. Cleopatra may have experimented with it herself. Or at least pretended to. Either way, its presence in her collection speaks volumes about how the sacred and the strange often shared the same shelf. Some scholars suggest that Cleopatra's interest in these treatments was partly political. That by cultivating a persona of otherworldly beauty and mysterious methods, she projected an image that unnerved and enchanted the stiff-sandaled senators of Rome. Others claim she genuinely sought knowledge, that her baths, oils, and ointments were as much tools of survival as they were of seduction. The truth? Probably both. She was playing a long game, and every leaf of crushed mint and droplet of spiced myrrh was a move on the board. You reach a low bench near the basin, where a tablet lies covered in scrawled glyphs, part recipe, part astrological chart. Some days, she would bathe in frankincense only under a waxing moon. Other days, she would abstain from rose entirely, claiming it muddled the thoughts during statecraft. Whether these patterns were rooted in belief or strategy, they shaped her rituals. A quiet hum rises from a corner alcove. A servant crushes fresh thyme and lavender buds using a mortar made of black basalt. The sound is steady, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The oil that will be poured over the herbs is from a special jar, one painted with a falcon and lined with thin sheets of beeswax. When warmed, it smells like desert rain. You allow your hand to linger over one final item on the table, a necklace strung with tiny clay ampoules. Each holds a pinch of scented powder. A traveling perfume kit, perhaps. Or a backup charm against foul airs. It's impossible to say for certain. But you imagine her touching it absently during tense meetings or silent walks through the palace. From this chamber, her scent was born, not just of flowers and roots, but of intention. Of legacy. Of power, distilled into droplets and dust. And she understood one thing above all: people remember how you smell longer than what you say. The scent lingers on your fingertips as you step back into the corridor, something between lotus and lemon balm, a whisper of her presence. But Cleopatra is no longer in the hallway. She has moved on, and you follow the subtle drift of perfume to the next chamber, her private salon. It's a quiet room, more intimate than the grand reception halls, yet still dressed in elegance. The floor is tiled with turquoise inlay and fragments of shell. Golden fans in the shapes of papyrus fronds stand silently in the corners, unmoving in the still, thick air. Cushions are scattered across low benches, the fabric dyed in hues of saffron, indigo, and ochre. At the center lies a brazier, its embers glowing gently beneath a bowl of simmering rosewater and cinnamon bark. This is where Cleopatra prepares for appearances, not the ceremonial ones but the political ones. This is where allies are swayed over platters of dates and fig paste, where whispered deals are sealed with sly glances over wine, and where the final touches are made to her person before she enters a room. And now, it's time for her skin to be dressed. A handmaiden, older than most, approaches with a wooden tray. On it sit a collection of unguents, salves, and scented oils. Cleopatra seats herself on a low-cushioned bench, her posture regal, yet relaxed. The handmaiden begins with the queen's feet, working slowly with a salve of crushed almonds, fig oil, and powdered barley. The scent is nutty and warm. It's said to soften calluses while offering a faint protective layer against the coarse leather of sandals and palace stone floors. You notice how each item used on Cleopatra has a dual purpose: beauty and protection, aroma and utility. The ancient world, after all, did not afford the luxury of waste. Next, the handmaiden lifts a slender jar of translucent green gel, aloe, mixed with sea salt and a touch of basil. It's dabbed behind Cleopatra's knees and at the inside of her elbows. Not just for coolness, but to ward off chafing and sun irritation. Alexandria's sun, when it strikes the palace's polished courtyards, can feel like a golden hammer. Then comes the kohl. Carefully, it is ground from a block of galena and mixed with a touch of goose fat, just enough to bind it. A thin stick is dipped, twirled, and applied in a single graceful motion along her eyelids. The effect is striking, not just decorative, but medicinal. Ancient Egyptians believed kohl warded off eye infections and even protected against the evil eye. Historians still argue whether its popularity stemmed more from aesthetics or from function, but with Cleopatra, it hardly matters. Her gaze is now sharp as obsidian. She gestures toward a small box, and the handmaiden lifts the lid to reveal a waxy balm the color of desert clay. It's scented with cinnamon and cassia, mixed with beeswax and gooseberry. This is for her lips, colored enough to deepen her natural hue, but not enough to suggest vanity. That line is thin, especially for a queen among Roman diplomats. She dabs it on herself this time, using the curved side of a tiny ivory tool. No mirror. She doesn't need one. You sit nearby, watching as the air in the room shifts with every subtle action. She's building herself, not disguising, not concealing, but choosing what version of Cleopatra the world will meet today. You glance to the side and see an odd object, half fan, half vial. A personal scent diffuser, perhaps. It's filled with dried herbs, lemon verbena, crushed rosehips, and fennel seeds. When fanned, it casts a faint fragrant mist, not unlike the modern concept of aromatherapy. She sometimes uses it to calm guests or mask less savory smells. And today? Today it's for control. She picks it up, fans once, then hands it to the servant. The room's mood changes. And in walks another visitor. A Roman, lean, sun-darkened, with the posture of someone who has sat through too many Senate hearings. He's not announced. But she knew he would come. She always does. You slip further into the background. The Roman bows, and she does not rise. He comments on the scent in the air, sweet, but not cloying. She smiles faintly. A blend of my homeland, she replies, and yours. A bit of Alexandrian olive oil. A bit of Roman myrtle. It's not true. The blend is purely Egyptian. But the words are calculated. The scent is another weapon, one of patience, distraction, allure. The Roman doesn't know he's losing the conversation before it begins. From your corner, you see the servant carefully cap the young ones in oils. One of them, the balm made from date palm resin and powdered sandalwood, is placed back into its velvet-lined box. That one's special, used only on days when Cleopatra must command absolute attention. She doesn't need it today. Not yet. But it will come. A papyrus scroll rests nearby, with tiny notations in Greek. Ingredients. Dosages. Observations. Cleopatra doesn't just use scents, she studies them. As a science, a sorcery, a strategy. Historians still argue whether she learned this from temple priests or Greek physicians. Some say she invented her own formulas, drawing on half-remembered recipes from her Macedonian ancestors. Others believe she adapted what she found in the Great Library's medical scrolls, cross-referencing beauty with botany, politics with perfume. Regardless of origin, it's working. The Roman's posture is relaxing. His tone softens. She tilts her head slightly. The balm on her neck catches the light. You, too, feel it. That slow pull. The spell of scent. The architecture of presence. Cleopatra rises. Conversation over. Decision made. She doesn't wait for a response. The Roman will follow soon enough. They always do. And you realize, with a curious shiver, that the real performance hasn't even started. The Roman leaves the salon with a dazed expression, the scent of cassia still clinging to his cloak, and you trail after Cleopatra as she strides down a mosaic corridor in quiet sandals. The walls here are adorned with reliefs of lotus blossoms and winged deities, though she hardly notices them anymore. These halls are as familiar to her as your own hallway at home, except, perhaps, with better frescoes and fewer scorpions. She walks without rush, but with purpose. You're heading toward the palace apothecary, not because she needs anything urgent, but because Cleopatra is not the kind of queen who waits to be surprised. She likes to know what's being prepared, who is making it, and what backup blend exists in case the main perfume fails to seduce a Roman general. The apothecary is tucked behind a pillared courtyard, near a bubbling fountain where ibis birds occasionally land to sip. The scent of herbs thickens as you approach: thyme, marjoram, dried oranges, and that ever-present tang of vinegar used to clean bronze tools. Inside, two assistants in rough linen tunics are grinding something with mortars the size of helmets. They look up nervously when she enters, then quickly bow. One nearly spills a bowl of mint sprigs. You look around. Shelves of clay jars labeled in Demotic, Greek, and hieratic script. Bundles of dried herbs hang from the beams like fragrant bats. Wax-sealed vials are arranged like soldiers in formation, frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon oil, blue lotus resin, and a mysterious reddish sludge marked simply with the symbol for heat. Cleopatra takes it all in with a quick glance, like a general inspecting her troops. Then she walks straight to the back table, where a wide bronze bowl simmers over low coals. A perfumer, thin, ancient, and apparently unbothered by the heat, nods to her and stirs slowly with a paddle. "What stage?" she asks in Egyptian. "Second reduction," he replies. "Pomegranate and nard still balancing." She nods once. This, you realize, is one of her secret preparations. Not for today. Not even for this week. But perhaps for a future arrival. Someone important enough to deserve the pomegranate blend, a fruit associated with fertility, yes, but also with knowledge. Cleopatra doesn't perfume herself to please. She perfumes herself to plan. She picks up a small vial near the brazier, uncorks it, and sniffs. Her eyes narrow. "Too much spikenard," she murmurs. The perfumer blinks. "I follow the measure." Then the measure is wrong. She hands it back, unbothered. "Rebalance." You glance at the assistant, who is now sweating more from stress than heat. He scrambles to obey. A new tray is brought out, small bowls of powdered ingredients. Cleopatra's fingers hover above them like a painter selecting pigments. She pinches a bit of fenugreek and lets it drop into a mortar, followed by a fragment of civet paste wrapped in fig leaf. The scent is instantly overwhelming, earthy, musky, a little too real. But she smiles. "Not for me," she says to no one in particular. "For a senator's wife." She favors strength over subtlety. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's deep knowledge of perfumery came from formal temple training or simply obsessive trial and error. What's not debated is that she was considered a master of the craft. Roman sources, even the cranky ones, often admit that no scent clung quite like hers, and none lingered longer in memory. You notice a scroll hanging from a peg on the wall. It's a list. Ingredients crossed out, new ones scribbled in. Some are familiar: cardamom, iris root, musk. Others are strange: fermented crocodile egg, powdered oyster shell, ashes of sacred figure. A fringe tidbit you might enjoy: there are records of certain Egyptian perfumes using goose grease that had been aged underground for 7 years. Apparently, nothing says power like the scent of committed decay. Cleopatra selects a block of hardened resin and grinds it herself, slow, methodical, like she's stirring fate. This one is storax, dark and syrupy, harvested from a Levantine shrub under the light of the moon. Or so the trader claimed. She doesn't believe half of what merchants say. But she keeps buying anyway. The perfumer leans in. "We've secured the labdanum." She pauses, intrigued. Labdanum is tricky. It comes from scraping the sticky resin off goat beards after they've grazed through specific bushes. Romantic, isn't it? She nods again. "I'll need it next week." Begin warming it with mastic and myrtle. You can almost see the recipe forming in her mind. It's like watching a composer prepare a silent symphony. She doesn't even need to sniff anymore. She knows the blend by memory, by instinct, by the way it makes the air curve around a conversation. After a while, she steps back. "Send me the samples tonight," she says. Then, with a small smile, and label them properly this time. I don't want another relaxation bomb that smells like boiled leeks. The assistant bows so quickly he nearly headbutts the table. Cleopatra exits, and you follow, your senses still fogged with scents both intoxicating and absurd. You pass the fountain again, where one of the ibis birds is now standing in the water, entirely unimpressed with civilization. You envy it, just a little. Back through the courtyard, past rows of palm trunks and lattice screens. The heat of the apothecary lingers on your skin, but the palace breeze cools it quickly. The queen pauses at a tall window, one hand resting lightly on a pillar. Below, the city of Alexandria stretches out like a carpet, market stalls, minarets, fishermen unloading baskets of silver-scaled mullet. The scent of the sea pushes past the jasmine. She breathes in. Not for beauty. Not for effect. Just because she can. Then she turns, already thinking about the next meeting, the next blend, the next move. You, meanwhile, can't get the smell of labdanum out of your tunic. Welcome to her world. The day drifts on, warm and golden, but Cleopatra never fully relaxes. Even in repose, there's calculation. And today, she's chosen to spend part of her afternoon in one of the smaller, more secluded garden courtyards, what she calls her quiet oasis, though it still buzzes faintly with insects and low-voiced attendants lingering just out of view. You follow at a respectful distance, past arching date palms and groves of lemon trees, their tart fragrance mingling with the sweet drifts of flowering tamarisk. In the center of the garden lies a long marble bench, partially shaded by trellised vines dripping with ripe grapes. Cleopatra reclines here, draped in a linen robe dyed with rare indigo, a color that once symbolized mourning but, in her case, seems more like armor. She has a scroll open beside her. You squint. It's not a treaty, not poetry, at least, not exactly. It appears to be a list of verbal combinations, some marked with stars, others struck through with small, annoyed slashes. Today, the queen is thinking about skin. Specifically, how to maintain hers in the relentless sun and dry heat of Alexandria while keeping her face unmarred by age or worry. She gestures, and a servant approaches carrying a small tray, bowls of crushed almonds, honey, sour goat's milk, and something thick and white that smells vaguely like clay. She dips 2 fingers into the almond paste and smooths it across her jawline, eyes half-lidded in focus. A nearby handmaid helps apply the honey mixture to her cheeks, dabbing delicately with a cloth dipped in rosewater. You blink as the breeze shifts. There's a subtle note in the air, fruity but sharp. Cleopatra has added a secret ingredient to the mask today, mashed dates soaked in vinegar. It's a local trick, supposedly used by camel herders to prevent sunburn. Historians still argue whether this blend actually helped skin health or simply masked the smell of court life in summer. She lets it sit. While she waits, a musician somewhere nearby begins to play a slow, melodic tune on a lyre. It echoes faintly between the stone walls. Cleopatra hums along, a quiet, almost childish melody, and you realize this is as close to peace as she gets. And then, as if summoned by the gods of irony, a servant bursts through the side arch, breathless, bowing before he speaks. Messenger from the upper delta, he gasps. With news of the barley blight. She doesn't flinch. Doesn't even sit up. Just waves a honey-slick hand toward the main hall. Send them to the vizier. I'm steeping. The servant hesitates, then bows again and rushes off. Cleopatra sighs through her nose, and you hear it, that little exhale of royal irritation. The kind that could end an administrator's career, or simply delay a dinner. The honey mask is wiped away, gently, with warm linen soaked in orange blossom water. You're surprised to learn this next step involves rubbing her skin with a small linen pouch filled with finely ground salt and green clay. It's mildly abrasive, and a fringe tidbit you might not expect. Cleopatra often preferred exfoliants made from crushed pearls. Not because they worked better. Because it annoyed the Romans to waste treasure on something invisible. She dabs her face with a towel, then gestures for the final step. From another tray, a servant produces a vial of oil, not just any oil, but the Queen's summer blend. A base of sesame oil, infused with blue chamomile, crushed mint, and powdered myrrh. The scent is cool, herbal, refreshing. It glides onto her skin like silk across marble. She closes her eyes for a moment. It would be poetic to say this is when she's most herself. But in truth, Cleopatra is never not performing. Even now, she's composing the message her scent will carry to those who lean in too close. Historians debate whether Cleopatra invented this layered sensory manipulation or simply perfected it. But her understanding of how smell tied to memory, how texture shaped perception, was unparalleled. A general might forget your face, but he'd remember the way your hands smelled like saffron and storm. The garden quiets again. You sit at the edge of a low fountain, dipping your fingers in the water, watching a frog blink lazily from a lily pad. You imagine what it must feel like to spend your life attended, scented, watched. And just when you think she's done, when the oil has dried and her skin glows like sunlit marble, Cleopatra turns to the handmaid nearest her and asks, "Did we receive the mare's milk shipment from the Oasis tribe?" The maid nods quickly. "Yes, my queen." Chilled and strained. Cleopatra smiles. "Good. For tomorrow's bath. Add rose hips and coriander seeds. And bring in the Nubian charcoal for my eyes." You stand to follow. But before you leave the garden, you glance at the tray one last time. On it rests a small bowl of something dark and glossy. You lean in. It's crocodile dung. Not metaphorical. Actual dried dung, ground and mixed with crushed fig leaves. Said to tighten the skin and ward off evil spirits. Or acne. Honestly, both. You shake your head. Even in her pursuit of beauty, Cleopatra never forgets to intimidate. The moon is high now, and Cleopatra's palace glows from within like a lantern lit with secrets. Soft torchlight flickers across white limestone columns, casting tall, wavering shadows. You trail behind her retinue as she returns inside, the scent of rosewater and crushed mint still drifting faintly from her skin. The garden masks have been wiped away, but her preparations aren't done, not even close. Because tonight, the queen plans to entertain. Not diplomats or generals, but poets and philosophers, her favored thinkers, charmers, and chessboard confidants. You get the sense that these evenings are her favorite, and also her most dangerous. She glides into her reception chamber, where the walls are painted in lapis blue and burnished gold. Papyrus-shaped columns flank the room, and cushions are strewn across intricately woven reed mats. Musicians crouch in the corner, plucking gentle harmonies from lyres and flutes. Wine, imported from Cyprus, is already flowing. But before she sits, Cleopatra visits her private dressing alcove. Here, the next stage of transformation begins. Not into a goddess, not into a warrior queen, but into something even more terrifying, a fully composed hostess with an agenda and flawless skin. The chamber is filled with jars and flasks, labeled in demotic script or marked with animal symbols for those who cannot read. There's the lion for boldness, the owl for wisdom, the ibis for grace. She selects 3 unmarked bottles and sniffs each, choosing the one with a sharp herbal bite. It's a tincture of fenugreek, soaked in fig sap, with hints of bay and powdered cinnamon bark. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra used fenugreek for its supposed fertility benefits or simply for the unique scent. It lingers long after application and cuts through the heavy air like a whisper with teeth. You watch her rub a few drops along her pulse points, inside the wrists, behind the ears, and just above the heart. A calculated placement. The scent will rise as she speaks, catch the air as she turns. A courtier might forget her words, but never the impression. One of her aides brings forward a shallow clay bowl filled with warm liquid, milk, not goat this time, but mare's milk steeped with cloves and orange peel. Cleopatra uses it to rinse her hands, then dabs her face again with a cloth soaked in lavender infusion. Her final flourish tonight is a salve for her lips. It's not colorless. You notice the faintest reddish tint as she applies it, crushed pomegranate mixed with carob resin and beeswax. A fringe tidbit? Cleopatra had her own formula for lip balm, and it was considered so unique that Roman women tried to recreate it for years, with mixed and occasionally revolting results. She finishes and smiles into a small polished bronze mirror, not out of vanity, but strategy. Then she walks into the chamber like a rising tide. The philosophers and poets stand, awkwardly, and bow. She waves them down with a grin. Wine is poured, figs passed around, and Cleopatra begins to ask questions, not answer them. That's her style. She leans in close, makes the quiet ones speak, and the loud ones sweat. You notice one of the guests, a scholar from Rhodes, can't stop dabbing his brow. He sips his wine too fast. His tunic is a little too thick for the room's heat. Cleopatra eyes him coolly. "Too much honey in your wine?" she asks, feigning innocence. He chokes a little, then laughs too loudly. She lets the silence sit for a second before shifting the attention elsewhere. These gatherings are not just social. They're intelligence operations. Cleopatra listens for tremors in the talk, for patterns in the flattery. She learns who's aligned with whom, who's discontented, who's worth cultivating, and who might need to be, gently, removed. And always, she is sent in stillness and glowing skin. Her posture is impeccable, though her throne is little more than a low-backed cedar chair wrapped in linen. Her bare feet rest on a stool. A cat rubs against her ankle. She doesn't look down. There's a lull in the conversation, and someone asks about her beauty, how she maintains it in the heat, the stress, the constant pressure. Cleopatra raises one eyebrow and tilts her head. "Dates," she says dryly. "And strategic naps." Everyone laughs. But you know better. You've seen the jars, the masks, the strange pastes and infusions. You know the truth is much more complex, and much more Cleopatra. She leans back now, letting her eyes drift over the group like a painter surveying a canvas. Not judging, exactly, but weighing. She lifts her wine and sips. The night hums on. Somewhere, deep within the palace, water trickles through channels. The scent of frankincense curls through the air from a corner brazier. The musicians begin another slow, minor key melody. And Cleopatra smiles. Because here, surrounded by the thinkers of her court, bathed in light and mystery, she's not just a queen. She's a story they'll retell over and over, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in awe. And you, lucky traveler, have seen what lies behind the incense and the laughter. Crushed pomegranate on the lips, fenugreek on the wrists, and a queen who understands that perfume can be prophecy. The night deepens, and the palace seems to settle into itself, breathing slowly like some great stone creature. Torches hiss and pop along the corridors, casting waves of orange and gold across walls painted with lotus flowers and desert gods. The scent of myrrh lingers in the air, smoky and dense, as Cleopatra finally retreats from her evening salon. You follow at a respectful distance, past yawning guards and whispering servants, through the quieter inner halls of the palace, where secrets tend to collect like desert dust. The queen walks slowly now, her face serene, her thoughts unreadable. As she turns a corner, a serving girl falls into step beside her with a lidded basket. You can smell it before it's opened: frankincense, almond paste, and something sharper, mastic gum, maybe, or a bit of vinegar-soaked myrtle. Cleopatra accepts the offering and draws from the basket a small clay jar marked with a falcon. That's Horus, the sky god. Fitting for what's inside. The jar contains a skin ointment reserved for nights like this, a blend of myrrh oil, wild juniper, and powdered ostrich eggshell. Historians still argue whether the crushed shells were included for mineral content or simply as a status flex. Ostriches weren't exactly easy to come by, even in Egypt. Either way, it's thought to tighten the skin, ward off blemishes, and prevent the ill winds of aging from settling into your cheeks. Cleopatra scoops a tiny bit with her pinky and massages it delicately into her temples and chin. You imagine the paste has a gritty texture, slightly cool to the touch. A fringe tidbit: Roman gossip claimed Cleopatra had a magic dust that could smooth even the most stubborn frown lines. Some said it was just sand from the Nile, others insisted it was powdered emerald. Tonight, though, she relies on something more traditional. The queen continues on, her bare feet silent on the polished limestone. Eventually, she reaches a chamber unlike the others, a small domed room with a star-shaped opening in the ceiling, through which the actual stars peer in. This, you realize, is her private sanctuary. Not the throne room. Not the perfumed baths. This is where she thinks. It's simple. A low table. A few scrolls. Cushions. A polished basin filled with water and floating petals. She kneels beside the basin and unwraps another parcel brought earlier by a eunuch attendant. This one contains a dark green salve in a wide alabaster dish. The smell is unmistakable: henna, mixed with olive oil, and a few drops of fermented date wine. She uses it not for her hands, but for her nails, painting each one with a tiny reed brush, coating them in color that will deepen overnight to a soft rust red. The symbolism is clear. Red nails, even then, meant strength, beauty, and defiance. It's not for vanity, it's for armor. As she waits for the henna to dry, Cleopatra pulls a small scroll from the table and reads silently. You catch only the first line: a poem, possibly Greek, possibly one of her own making. You'll never know. She folds it away before you can get a better look. She shifts slightly, rearranges her robes, and finally exhales a long, slow breath. Even queens need moments to be no one. Not a ruler. Not a lover. Just a woman, quiet and alone, under a ceiling that shows the stars. A servant brings in a final bowl, this one of cooled aloe water steeped with lotus leaves. Cleopatra uses it to wipe away the remnants of the evening from her cheeks and brow, the scent crisp and earthy. A mainstream fact for you: aloe vera was so highly prized in ancient Egypt it was often called the plant of immortality, and it was used for everything from burns to embalming. Here, it's just comfort. You notice now that everything Cleopatra has used tonight, the oils, the powders, the little painted jars, is part of a ritual, yes, but also a language. A secret grammar of scent and texture and motion. Where a modern ruler might wield speeches and armies, she chooses scent trails and night masks. You wonder what secrets are held in the unlabeled jars left behind on the table. One is wrapped in goat parchment. Another is sealed with beeswax and twine. The third glows faintly in the torchlight, suggesting some sort of mineral sheen. Before you can inspect closer, the queen stands. The henna has dried. She flexes her fingers. She glances once toward the opening in the ceiling, where a single bright star seems to stare back. Then she leaves. You follow again, this time toward her sleeping chamber. The route there is quieter still, lined with carved lions and framed by tall reed doors. The wind moans faintly beyond the stone, but inside all is still. It's nearly time. But Cleopatra doesn't go straight to bed, not yet. First, there's one final vial she carries herself. It's small, fitted with a gold cap shaped like a cobra's hood. You recognize the contents from earlier, blue lotus oil. She dabs a drop behind each ear, closes her eyes, and breathes it in. Then she steps over the threshold of her private room, and the doors close gently behind her. You wait outside, respectful. Curious. Amazed, perhaps, at the sheer weight of ritual that goes into ending just one day in the life of this queen. In the bathwater, you realize, the famous oils and herbs and salves, was never just about beauty. It was preparation. It was power. It was defense. In a world that demanded so much of a woman to simply be visible, Cleopatra bathed in armor. You remain just beyond the carved reed doors, where a bronze incense bowl smolders faintly on a pedestal, casting lazy spirals of sandalwood into the corridor. The scent is soft, almost sleepy, as if even the palace itself is ready to exhale. Inside the queen's chamber, you hear only the rustle of linen, the soft murmur of attendants withdrawing. The ritual is nearly complete. But the night, oh, the night still has its secrets to offer. Let's step back into that chamber together, shall we? The queen's bed is unlike anything you've ever seen. A low platform wrapped in woven papyrus mats, topped with layers of dyed linen sheets in soft saffron and indigo. The posts are carved acacia, etched with prayers to Hathor, the goddess of love, of beauty, of joy. It's a bed meant for dreams, and for the woman who commands them. She reclines now, not yet fully asleep, and the last thing she reaches for is not a scroll or a mirror, but a little leather sachet tucked beneath her pillow. You lean forward, curious. She opens it and draws out a single piece of dried resin, wrapped in linen. Mastic, you realize. A kind of ancient chewing gum, harvested from tree sap. It cleans the teeth, sweetens the breath, and soothes the stomach. A queen's midnight mint. Fringe tidbit. Some records say mastic was also chewed to calm nerves before big speeches. Given that Cleopatra once talked a Roman general into letting her rule a country, we'll let that theory stand. As she slowly chews, her eyes drift to the ceiling beams above, painted with stars, with spirals, with fish that seem to swim through the dark wood as if floating through the firmament. She's thinking. Always thinking. But also, for the first time tonight, truly resting. The air grows still. And now, let's take a quiet moment to admire a detail easily missed, the amulet hanging from the queen's bedpost. It's small, barely the size of your thumb, but its gold glints in the torchlight. It's a wedged eye, symbol of protection. But this one isn't new. The metal is dulled, the carving worn. A childhood relic, perhaps. Something she's kept through war, through betrayal, through empire. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra truly believed in the magic of such things or simply understood the comfort they brought. A little faith in your pocket, a bit of power braided into string. You look closer at the walls now, murals fading at the edges, but still vivid. Scenes of river journeys, of sacred animals, of goddesses dancing with tamarines. One panel shows a blue-skinned nut, the sky goddess, arching her body over the earth while stars spill from her fingertips. The room itself seems designed to coax dreams out of your skull. And perhaps that's the point. Because here's something to remember, Cleopatra wasn't just a queen. She was a performer. A tactician. A master of spectacle. Her bathwater was a story. Her bed, a stage. Even her sleepwear, dyed linen, probably soaked in calendula and fig leaf extract, was part of the act. And yet, here, she's only human. A little warm, a little tired, her fingers stained from henna, her breath sweet with mastic and wine. The makeup's off. The sandals are gone. The snake jewelry sleeps on its tray. And next to her, as ever, is the bowl. Ah yes, the sleep water. It's not just a poetic touch. A shallow alabaster bowl rests beside her bed, filled with cool water and blue lotus petals. The scent is faint but comforting. It's said to lull the senses, slow the mind, invite calm. In ancient times, mothers would lay sprigs of lotus beside their infants to help them nap. Kings would sip it before long journeys. The queen dips her fingers into the water, trails them across her wrist. A quiet gesture. A goodbye to wakefulness. You take another step back. This moment isn't for you. It's not for anyone. Just Cleopatra and the hush of a palace that's finally surrendered to sleep. But before we drift too far into silence, one last thought. In a world lit by torches and ruled by men who brandished swords and scrolls, here was a woman who mastered the politics of perfume. Who wrote her story in rosewater, in crushed pearls, in saffron dye. And every drop in that bath, every salve, every oil, was chosen. Measured. Strategized. She knew exactly what she was doing. Because queens may rest, but they never stop reigning. The flame in the incense bowl trembles once, then stills. The room darkens. And the night takes over. Outside, the Nile flows onward, smooth and eternal. And inside, Cleopatra finally closes her eyes. You linger at the edge of that dimly lit chamber, though the queen has long since drifted into sleep. Outside, the palace settles deeper into silence, the kind of silence that hums in your ears and makes you hyper-aware of every soft creak, every sigh of wind against the stone. Even the cicadas seem to take turns tonight. You slip down a side passage now, leaving Cleopatra to her dreams. The corridor is narrow, painted with lotus scrolls and hunting scenes, and dimly lit by a row of clay lamps flickering gently. The scent here is different, older, dustier. Papyrus, oil, and something sharp like dried marjoram. You pass an open storeroom, where rows of unguent jars stand like tiny soldiers, some labeled, others sealed with beeswax, each holding its own secrets. Cedar resin, rose paste, blue woad, frankincense gum. Ingredients not only for the queen's bath, but for her survival. For diplomacy. For seduction. For war. And tucked away on the bottom shelf, nearly missed, is something strange. A small jar filled with crushed shells and what looks like pale amber honey. You crouch for a better look. The label is faded, but a servant has scratched a note on the wooden shelf: Nile crab essence, fever and sweetness. A quirky fringe detail. Ancient Egyptians believed that some crustaceans had cooling properties. Not everyone agreed. There were scrolls dedicated to debating the medical effects of mud crabs. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were rooted in observation or sheer optimism. Either way, someone once decided crab would make a nice ingredient for nighttime lotion. You smile. Cleopatra's routines weren't just about beauty, they were a kind of alchemy. A mingling of senses and superstitions. She didn't just soak in rosewater. She experimented. Every bath was half laboratory, half lullaby. Farther down the corridor, you pass an antechamber where servants sleep on low mats, wrapped in linen, their sandals lined neatly by the wall. One of them stirs in her sleep and mutters something about tamarind paste. Even in dreams, they're cataloging ingredients. You emerge into a private garden, a quiet little courtyard surrounded by limestone walls, where moonflowers bloom wide and white in the pale light. In the center, a shallow basin reflects the stars. You pause. The water is still, smooth as polished obsidian, and for a moment, you imagine Cleopatra herself standing here in the early hours, dipping her fingers into the basin, whispering a prayer to Isis, or perhaps just counting constellations. It's easy to forget that even queens have doubts, fears, longings. The bath was a place to wash them off. Or soak in them. Here's something soothing to chew on. The Egyptians believed that bathing could restore not just the body, but the soul. Ritual purification was part of temple life, part of healing, part of mourning. They bathed before speaking with priests, before making offerings, even before reading certain texts. Water was never just water. It was a key. The garden breeze shifts, bringing the scent of aloe and crushed mint from a nearby planter. You follow it toward a shaded pergola where an elderly attendant sits cross-legged, sorting dried herbs into woven baskets. She doesn't look up, just hums softly, lost in her task. Every now and then, she taps the side of the basket as if reminding the herbs to behave. You crouch beside her, watching. In one hand, she holds a bundle of blue-flowered hyacinth. In the other, sweet marjoram. Both are sleep aids. Both were sometimes steeped in bath water or crushed into oil. Too much, she murmurs, still not looking at you, and the queen dreams of war. You ask, softly, and just enough? She finally glances over, one eye gleaming. She dreams of Rome. And wakes smiling. It's a good line. You leave her to her sorting. Back through the garden now, retracing your steps, you hear a soft rustle above, a night heron, maybe, gliding across the moon. Or just the wind nudging the date palms. Either way, it feels like a sign. A shift. Something old passing by on silent wings. You return to the corridor, walk slowly past Cleopatra's door once more, and this time do not stop. Instead, you descend a spiral staircase carved into the stone itself. The torches flicker as you pass. At the bottom, a small side hall leads to a chamber not marked for royalty, but for records. Inside, scrolls are tucked into pigeonholes. Recipes. Imports. Bath formulas. Letters from distant spice merchants claiming their myrrh is fresher than the competition's. It's not glamorous, but it's a gold mine. One scroll lies open on the desk, a formula titled Rest for the Queen. You scan the ingredients. Lotus distillate, moon-dried. Papyrus ash, powdered fine. Nubian honey. 2 drops crocodile oil. Whisper of amber. Chant of newt, optional. You blink. Chant of newt? Is that a perfume blend or a literal song? No one knows. But it's written down, so someone believed in it. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra herself invented these combinations or simply endorsed them. Some say she worked with perfumers directly. Others believe the myth of her master recipes is just that, a myth. But even if her hands never mixed the oils, her fingerprints are everywhere. Because when you rule an empire and your power depends on presence, on being unforgettable, you don't leave your scent to chance. And when you rule alone, you make sure your bathwater whispers stories long after the steam fades. The record room begins to cool as the torches flicker low. You step back, careful not to knock over a scroll rack or sneeze in the direction of ancient papyrus. The formula still lies open on the table, that chant of newt lingering in your mind like the final notes of a half-remembered lullaby. You slip from the chamber and find yourself once again in the sleeping heart of the palace. The halls feel even quieter now. There's something almost reverent about it, like the very stones are holding their breath. You turn a corner and come upon an alcove you hadn't noticed before. It's small, with a cushioned bench beneath a window cut high into the wall. Moonlight pools through the opening like silver paint, illuminating a small oil lamp on a shelf and an open copper box filled with tiny vials, no more than a thumb's length each. You lift one gently. The label is faded but just legible, Blue Nile Bloom, for quiet nights. You raise the vial to your nose, and the scent is strange. Cool and watery, with a hint of something metallic beneath. Not unpleasant, just mysterious. You wonder what it's meant to do. Calm the mind? Still the thoughts? Ward off bad dreams? Fringe tip: some ancient Egyptians believed that nighttime scents could shape dreams. That if you fell asleep surrounded by specific herbs or oils, your mind would follow their trail like breadcrumbs. Dream therapy wasn't just superstition, it was ritual. The bottle goes back into the box, and you let your hand linger over the others. One says milk thistle and opium. Another, fig skin ash, steeped in wine. A third is unmarked, but sealed with gold wire. Best left alone. You move on, deeper into the palace, where even the guards have begun to nod off at their posts, heads tilted, spears resting gently against their shoulders. One of them starts awake as you pass and tries to pretend he wasn't dozing. You offer him a polite smile. He tries to return it but mostly looks grateful that you didn't mention the drool. Through another archway now, and into what was once a banquet hall. Empty, save for a few servants clearing away the last remnants of figs and wine. The air here is thick with fruit and cinnamon and the faint burn of spiced lamb. You take a breath and nearly cough, but in a pleasant, memory-jogging way. Like someone else's holiday dinner. In one corner stands a fountain, a tiered thing shaped like a lotus blossom, still burbling softly despite the hour. Floating atop its pool are a dozen petals, freshly scattered. You watch as they circle the fountain's center, hypnotic and slow. You remember something now, a story you heard earlier in the evening. About a noblewoman who'd once tried to win Cleopatra's favor by replicating her bath scent. She'd hired 7 alchemists, imported frankincense from Arabia, saffron from Anatolia, and crushed pearls from the coast. The result? an allergic reaction so impressive it was recorded in court gossip for weeks. Historians still argue whether the queen took offense, or simply didn't notice. You sit on the fountain's edge, gazing into the water, listening to its gentle gurgle. Cleopatra's influence wasn't just military or political. It was sensory. She conquered rooms with timing, gaze, language, and yes, with scent. A fragrance wasn't just about smell. It was about memory, control, presence. And hers? Hers entered before she did. You rise, wandering now into the servant's wing. A quieter zone, humbler and more practical. Here, the scent is linen soap, bread crust, and lamp oil. A woman dozes beside a folded pile of towels. A man stirs a pot of cooling water, testing it with his finger. They barely glance at you. Just another body in the endless stream of palace movement. At the end of the hall is a low stone doorway, its lintel carved with lotus stems. You duck through and enter a much smaller bathing room, one clearly not for queens. But it's charming. A modest sunken tub, a hook for a lantern, and a shelf of reused amphorae filled with basic oils, olive, thyme, maybe a bit of citron. Here, too, the ritual persists. Even the lowest ranks cleanse with intention. You lower yourself onto a bench and run your hand across the warm stone. Imagine the long line of people who have sat here, servants, scribes, maybe a visiting scholar or two. Each bringing their own version of calm. Their own silent mixtures. You find a half-used cloth tucked behind a jar, and the scent of it surprises you, rosemary, clean and bracing. Not what you expected here. But maybe that's the point. In a palace built to overwhelm the senses, small surprises are sometimes the most comforting. From somewhere behind you, a distant door creaks. Footsteps echo. Then silence. The palace is dozing once more. You rise, stepping out into the night air again. This time, the stars feel closer. The breeze cooler. The palace smells less like a queen's perfume and more like stone and dust and river water. It's a pleasant shift. You stroll slowly along the outer gallery, watching as the moon begins its descent. One last courtyard catches your eye, this one planted entirely with herbs. Not ornamental, but functional. Basil, chamomile, dill, hyssop. A royal apothecary's dream. You stoop to touch a mint leaf, inhaling its brightness. Somewhere in the quiet of the night, you can almost hear Cleopatra's laugh, distant, amused, carried on the wind like a fragrance. Not mocking. Just knowing. Because whether or not she invented every ingredient, she knew their power. She understood that a ruler is remembered not only for battles, but for presence. For how the room felt when she entered. And how long her memory lingered once she left. And here, in the hush between the fig trees and the moonlight, you feel it. The echo of her bath water. The ingredients no one writes down. The scent of history, fading gently, like steam in a marble room. You follow the curve of the herb garden's path until it melts back into the palace. The stone beneath your feet is warm from the day's sun, holding on to heat as though reluctant to let the night claim it. As you walk, the scent of mint and dill clings faintly to your fingertips, a sleepy sort of perfume that feels almost private, like the palace has shared a secret just for you. Back inside, the passage narrows. You duck beneath a hanging tapestry, faded blues and saffrons woven into the shape of Isis shielding a child. A symbol of protection. A gentle reminder that, even in palaces of politics and perfume, a whisper of the divine still lingers in the folds of daily life. Ahead is another chamber, small, windowless, but glowing with low oil lamps. The walls are tiled in patterns of lotus petals, and in the center sits a broad marble basin, shallow and dry. Clearly a preparation room of sorts. At the far end stands a wooden rack, and upon it, vessels. Row upon row of clay and alabaster pots. Some sealed with wax, others corked. All unlabeled. The historian in you itches to peek. You approach cautiously. One jar has a faint residue at its mouth, thick, dark, slightly glossy. You rub a bit between your fingers. Myrrh, maybe? No. Something smokier. Possibly pine tar blended with fig sap. The one beside it holds something crumbly, powder fine. You sniff, rose and crushed nutmeg. Exotic. A blend likely imported from the Levant or even deeper east. No small cost. A third holds a coarse grain paste. The texture is familiar, like mashed herbs in oil, but the smell is peculiar. Sharp. Almost medicinal. You wrinkle your nose. Fringe fact time: some of Cleopatra's reputed bath additives were anything but glamorous. Records, spotty though they are, mention mustard seeds, fermented honey, and even powdered snail shell. Said to soothe the skin, boost circulation, and ward off evil spirits. Or just exfoliate. Depends on who you ask. Historians still debate whether these ingredients were genuine rituals or exaggerated tales passed down by Roman chroniclers with more flair than facts. Roman authors, after all, were notorious for dramatizing Cleopatra's habits, usually to paint her as dangerously indulgent or seductively foreign. Apparently, smelling nice was a crime. You continue your exploration of the vessels, opening one shaped like a duck. Inside, waxy lumps that smell faintly of cinnamon and burnt sugar. Probably a hard bomb melted during application. Perhaps rubbed onto the neck or behind the ears. The next contains only dried petals. Jasmine, maybe. But with something else hidden beneath, a few golden flakes clinging to the pottery's inner rim. Gold? Could it be? You recall how some elite bath blends included actual gold leaf, so thin it dissolved in warm water. Not for any proven medicinal benefit, but to shimmer faintly on the skin afterward. Because, well, wouldn't you? And then you spot the strangest one, a tiny jar no larger than your thumb, sealed tightly with thread and beeswax. When you gently pry it open, the scent hits you immediately. Sharp. Animalistic. Definitely not floral. Could it be musk? Or civet? Ancient perfumers weren't squeamish. Ingredients derived from animals, glands, oils, even excretions, were prized for their longevity and warmth. Mixed well, they gave a perfume its soul. Applied poorly, they made you smell like an overly ambitious zoo. You seal the jar and place it back, wondering whose skin that scent once adorned. A priestess? A noble? Cleopatra herself, walking past columns in the half-light of morning? The silence of the room is thick. Only the faint hiss of lamp oil and the slow cooling of tile accompany your thoughts. You imagine yourself a scribe again, sitting quietly and documenting every one of these scents, trying desperately to match words to sensation: spicy, sweet, earthy, ghostly. You're reminded, not for the first time, that ancient beauty wasn't about perfection. It was about power. To control scent was to control perception. And Cleopatra? She turned that art into empire. She wasn't just bathing to clean her body, she was shaping how the world would remember it. Another jar, this one empty, bears a faint painted label. You trace the faded characters, MNDT, Mandrake. Ah. Now that's a bold choice. Mandrake root, believed to hold magical properties, powerful dreams, and potent aphrodisiac effects. Also, quite possibly toxic in high doses. The Egyptians were no strangers to its dual nature. They respected it, feared it, and used it sparingly. In a bath? Likely diluted. But still. That's not just skincare. That's alchemy. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's famed intelligence extended into actual pharmacological mastery or if she simply employed the best apothecaries in the land. But records suggest she was no passive consumer. She commissioned, blended, tweaked. In one account, she even tested ingredients on her own skin before allowing them near anyone else. Risky, maybe. But smart. You step back, letting the blend of smells drift over you again: smoke, resin, crushed rose, bitter bark, honeyed myrrh. And beneath it all, that trace of Nile silt, the unmistakable grounding scent of Egypt itself. The lamp flickers. Your limbs feel heavier. You glance once more at the rows of jars, each a memory, a whisper, a mystery. The forgotten ingredients in Cleopatra's bathwater were never just ingredients. They were stories. Messages. Layers of meaning that clung to her skin like armor and invitation. And as you leave the room, closing the wooden door gently behind you, you realize something. No matter how many scrolls you unroll, how many apothecary jars you inspect, some truths stay in the steam. Intangible. But deeply felt. And maybe that's enough. You step into a side corridor, narrower now, the kind of hallway meant for those in the know, servants, stewards, perhaps an apothecary carrying a carefully wrapped bundle. The tiles underfoot are darker, cooler, whispering the quiet secrets of a palace that rarely sleeps but always watches. You press your palm to the wall and feel the faint hum of the place. Not literal, of course, but it's as if the stone itself has absorbed 1,000 years of fragrant bath steam, hurried footsteps, muffled giggles, and quiet, urgent whispers. These are the echoes that don't make it into history scrolls. But they exist. You feel them now. There's a turn, and then, surprisingly, a small chamber you didn't expect. Oval-shaped, with deep purple walls and a domed ceiling painted to resemble a starry night sky. A bathing room, clearly, but not for cleaning. This room is about transformation. The tub at the center is cut from pinkish alabaster, so smooth and soft lit by oil lamps that it gleams like dewy skin. A towel hangs on a gold hook, embroidered with tiny lotuses. On the side table, a jar of oil with crushed mint floating in it. A shallow dish of salt crystals mixed with dried hibiscus petals. And another pot, bigger this time, with a stick of rolled cinnamon protruding like a flag. You swirl your finger in the salt dish and let the grains crunch softly. The hibiscus bleeds faint color into your fingertip. It's more delicate than you imagined, this whole process. Cleopatra's legendary baths often get painted as lavish indulgences. But here? It feels precise. Almost like ritual. Because bathing wasn't just hygiene. It was performance. Spiritual. Political. Even medicinal. Mainstream historians agree that Egypt's upper class, especially during the Ptolemaic era, placed immense value on aromatic bathing, not merely as a luxury but as a matter of status and health. For queens like Cleopatra, baths could double as statecraft. Invitations, seductions, negotiations all happened under veils of steam and scent. And yet, fringe records hint at something even deeper, an idea that certain scents could align the body with divine forces. That cinnamon in a bath, for instance, didn't just stimulate blood flow, it pleased Batet, the cat goddess of pleasure and protection. That crushed mint sharpened the mind for strategy. That hibiscus warmed the heart, stirred emotion, and made one receptive to omens. Historians still argue whether these connections were deeply held beliefs or simply poetic flourishes added centuries later. But in Egypt, the line between perfume and prayer was thin. You dip your hands into the dry alabaster basin. It's warm from the day's heat and smells faintly of lingering oils. You close your eyes and imagine it full, water poured in steaming buckets by hand, scented smoke curling from censers in each corner. You see the queen seated within, limbs glistening, servants moving like clockwork around her. Each gesture calculated. Each movement a declaration, I am not merely clean. I am radiant. And yet, beneath all that elegance, she was a human woman. Skin, breath, fatigue, hopes that had little to do with diplomacy. Perhaps she bathed to forget, sometimes. To soften her armor. You wonder what she thought of, lying back under all that steam. The world says Cleopatra was a seductress. But maybe she was just really good at making space for herself. You open your eyes again. The room is still. You notice a small inscription carved into the edge of the tub. Faded hieroglyphs, just a fragment, but enough to read. Fragrance endures where memory cannot. A poetic line, sure. But also a practical truth. Cleopatra's reign faded. Her coins were melted, her city rewritten. But the smell of spikenard oil on some warm skin? That lingers in the collective imagination. Even the Roman poets who disapproved of her couldn't help but mention how she smelled. There's a lesser-known scroll fragment by a traveling merchant who once claimed he caught her scent on a breeze, a wind that smelled like heated figs and something unknowable. That phrase alone has kept perfumers guessing for generations. You run a hand along the tub's rim. And suddenly, you remember something from earlier, a jar back in the herb pantry, unlabeled but filled with tiny seeds. Could those have been fenugreek? Used in baths, fenugreek leaves a maple-like scent on the skin. Warm. Nutty. Comforting. The kind of smell that makes you lean in before you even realize you've moved. Cleopatra likely knew exactly which scents provoked closeness, which held people at a distance, and which quietly branded a room as hers long after she left it. Because that's what perfume does. It haunts. You take a deep breath. The room is starting to feel humid, though there's no water in the tub. Or maybe your imagination's doing the work now. Carrying you closer to a past that was never preserved in marble, but in memory and chemistry. You imagine walking in her footsteps, not as a queen, but as someone simply trying to feel present in their own skin. To smell beautiful, to glow slightly, to prepare, yes, but also to rest. Even monarchs, after all, needed 5 minutes without a scroll or a senate or a dagger behind the curtain. You linger a little longer, then slowly exit the room. The hallway beckons again. But now, there's a new weight to your step, not heavy, but grounded. You've touched something beyond records. Beyond facts. A truth that rides on steam and clings to cloth. And maybe, just maybe, still lingers somewhere on the desert wind. You round the corner again, and the corridor widens. The air changes, cooler now, but laced with the earthy scent of terracotta and aged linen. This part of the palace has quiet bones. You're back near Cleopatra's private quarters, but closer to the storage chambers. Not the grand kind, this is where the personal effects rest. The forgotten bottles. The too powerful oils. The concoctions that made the court physician frown and say, "Maybe not this week." You press your hand against a plain wooden door and it creaks open to reveal a modest room with shelves lining every wall. Low jars stacked beside stone vials. Woven baskets containing dried leaves that crumble at a breath. There's no symmetry here. This isn't the public-facing part of her beauty. This is the backstage. And you know instantly, this was her experimenting space. A flat dish sits near the window, half filled with hardened honey and the remnant twigs of thyme. A shallow basin nearby contains what looks like dried pomegranate peel, cracked and curling. A perfume-testing fan, thin as a bird's wing, lies discarded in the corner. And next to it, a scrap of linen stiffened with resin, likely a prototype for scented fabric, or a failed attempt at wearable incense. You crouch beside it. The scent is faint now, just a whisper of something bitter and floral. But you recognize marjoram, a sleep herb, used to calm the nerves and ease breath. Some nights, perhaps, even a queen found her mind too loud. This was where she made choices. Not just for presentation, but for resilience. Mainstream historians document Cleopatra's partnerships with perfumers and herbalists across Alexandria. She was known to patronize experimental apothecaries, those who blended Greek medicinal knowledge with Egyptian temple practices. She may not have brewed every potion herself, but she curated with precision. Here's something odd. One ostracon, a shard of pottery bearing inked writing, discovered outside Edfu suggests the use of ox bile and frankincense in foot baths to restore balance and poise before debate. Whether that fragment belonged to a royal bathhouse or a local midwife is debated, but it paints a picture of how scent and body were tied to intellect and persuasion. Historians still argue whether Cleopatra's mastery of perfume was rooted more in practical chemistry or symbolic theater. Was she genuinely scent-sensitive, able to detect changes in mood from a drop of myrrh? Or was it part of her mystique, carefully cultivated to disarm foreign emissaries and bewilder Roman generals? Either way, she knew the power of invisibles. You reach for a jar labeled only by a faint hieratic scrawl. The lid lifts with a sigh, and inside, golden threads. Not fabric, but strands of dried saffron. Ancient and shockingly potent even now. Used sparingly, saffron dyed the bathwater a pale amber and left skin lightly flushed, as if newly in love or just overheated from honesty. Cleopatra's court believed in the body as both tool and message. Fragrance was punctuation. Color was grammar. Movement was a carefully conjugated verb. You rise slowly and cross to a deeper shelf. The containers here are older, more fragile. One still bears a faint wax seal, shaped like a lioness in mid-pounce. Bottet again. You crack the seal and blink. The scent is indescribable. It smells like ritual. Like old roses in desert salt, crushed bark and grief. The kind of fragrance you don't wear, you survive. Was this her heartbreak scent? Her funeral blend? Because even goddesses mourn. You close the jar gently, reverently. Some recipes don't need repeating. By the door, an open scroll flutters in the breeze from the lattice window. You read a fragment. She who walks with the scent of cypress and figs leaves no footprint. You smile. Even now, the poetry persists. Outside, the sky begins to shift. That soft, bruised purple that signals the edge of night. The kind of twilight Cleopatra would have bathed in, perhaps with the Nile scent drifting through the shutters and the city's noise falling away behind thick curtains. She may have soaked in oils meant for seduction, but also for silence. Because ruling, for all its pageantry, is lonely. Perfume doesn't just draw others in. Sometimes, it's a shield. You imagine her standing at her mirror, flanked by flickering lamplight, scent layering across her skin, the air thick with amber and rosewater and some unnameable thing. She turns her head slightly, watching herself. Checking. Not for flaws, but for truth. And now, all of it, every crushed petal, every stirred resin, every speculative bath, is behind you. You've wandered the private world of a queen who never stopped curating, even in sleep. You step back from the shelves. Let the silence reclaim the space. And now, dear listener, as we drift toward the end, it's time to let the last of the oils fade. To let the perfumes settle like dust on ancient marble. Because tonight, like Cleopatra, you've survived the politics, the expectation, the weight of appearances. You've learned that sometimes, the most powerful ingredient in a queen's bath wasn't milk or mint or gold, but solitude. Wind down. The fire fades now, soft orange flickers curling against stone. The room around you settles, sighing gently as the last notes of memory dissolve into quiet. The scent of saffron and fig has faded from your thoughts, leaving only calm, a gentle, perfumed stillness. You lie back, body heavy, limbs relaxed, the hush of ancient water echoing faintly in the distance. As if Cleopatra herself is drawing the curtains, brushing aside worries with one final handful of lavender dust. Outside the imagined palace, stars hang like beads on dark silk. No processions. No judgments. Just sleep waiting, kind and unhurried. You've wandered down marble corridors. Felt stone cool beneath your feet. Watched bathwater ripple gold. You've learned how even royalty, especially royalty, needs softness. A ritual. A pause. And now, you're here. No decisions to make. No perfumes to blend. Just the hush of linen, the gentle tug of breath, and the warmth of knowing you made it, through every layer of silk, through every forgotten ingredient. Let your thoughts settle. Let the old oils close their lids. Let Cleopatra's voice fade with the last whisper of rosewood in time. You're safe. You're still. And the bath, with all its mystery, will wait until tomorrow. Sweet dreams.